risk that your suit bring. You are great, taking wherever you've been. Your vision is better than anything you've seen. Standing where many have suffered and been grieved. Woman, don't bow down. Don't let them silence you.
Dumelang, re a le amogela gape mo It's a Feminist Thing, a space where we'll be engaging in a very important conversation. Our goal, to dismantle patriarchy. Today we're talking about Indigenous cultures and reveal the different ways they encourage the oppression and mistreatment of women. You can join our conversation by reaching out to us on all our social media pages. I'm not alone in this dismantling ya patriarchy. Ke tsamaile ma feminist a magolo. Pinakodisang Thando Mgqolozana Mndende. Culture is such a loaded topic, but what do we understand from the term itself, culture?
I think a lot of people seem to think that culture is just about, your tribal traditions, or being Zulu, or being Tswana, or being, Venda speaking. And it's not about that. Culture is about a long-standing practice. It's something that people do over a long period of time. And so when we kind of broaden the meaning and the understanding in that way, it means that we can look into other spaces where there's been things that have been going on for a very long period of time that refuse to evolve, that in this context are actually just quite toxic and wrong.
Culture is also something that we do as human beings, right? And I think that I conduct myself personally differently depending on where I am. So I have to code switch. I conduct myself, with respect. I perform particular gender roles because I don't want to mess up the culture and the practice.
Why not, by the way? What are you afraid of? What would happen if you put your urban girl attitude in a rural setting? What are you trying to achieve?
There's too many people to fight against.
There's too many people to fight against, but I also enjoy sitting around a table with women peeling potatoes. Not because I'm peeling potatoes, but because of the conversations that happen there. I actually feel affirmed by being part of that space and hearing the conversations on that level.
So there's a part of you that enjoys the perspective of it. I don't mind cultural practices, as long as they suit me. Yep, and I understand that if they suit me, they may not suit my family. But I think culture should be fluid. Culture is not static. I think we should take what we need from culture and certainly throw out some of the more problematic aspects. That's what I think.
Let's talk about culture beyond just, the tribal context. I mean, let's look, for instance, at organizational culture, where women are forced to wear heels and they're not allowed to show the shape of their body or even to reveal their breasts. A part of the body that is as natural as your legs and your arms cannot be seen.
Never mind, you can't see your legs. There's some cultures where women have to be completely hidden when they're in public or not going to be seen, or if they're not around their relatives. Hey, and I try so hard not to judge it.
But then there's also pop culture, right? And pop culture, how it influences us as well. The idea of the worship of money, the worship of capitalism, or also the use of the woman's body to sell products, right? Or to sell, luxury and an expensive life. And, that has also influenced us in a particular way.
I think it's influenced all of us. I think anybody who claims to be completely removed from the influences of culture.
And this is why as Soul City we do the work we do. We want people to be drawn to the Constitution, to their rights, to live their life the way they want. A way of life as we use sociology 101.
So we're talking about choice, really. And even me, judgmental me, and I'm like one of the problematic feminists of the past who used to be much more judgmental of like, why are you wearing such a short skirt?
Wow.
No, I was very problematic. But now my understanding of what feminism is for women to do whatever the hell they want to do. Really, it doesn't matter whether it's cultural. How about aparatuku? About la huinela ko kitchening ai kapele letsatsi kaofela ke khanya gage nna ke tsena kae. As long as we do what we choose to do. Problem ka culture ke gore ga o sa conform, like you were saying, there's too many people to fight. You are ostracized and you are treated as the other. So I don't know. I mean, look at me. I guess I'm a cry for help. I don't mind being ostracized.
I struggle even now to understand because go higher ra khudisiwa gona le ntho e bereng ke culture ke custom nje ke free flowing.
Khomotso mina nawe ngeke siziswane because mina ngithanda ukugqoka igcebe. I like short pants negcebezane even in professional environments because it's hot and I should be able to wear whatever I want.
Agreed. Give us your viewpoints, South Africa, on this matter. Join the conversation on our social media pages. Okay, now that we are all clear about culture and customs, let's kick off with our language feature expert, Ponzo Pilane.
Sawubona sisponso. Ngiyaphila sibongile. Yes. Cela usitshele kabanzi, what is the term of the day?
Today's term is male privilege and it's such a mouthful. Male privilege ke tlotlo le maemo a fiwang batho ba borre ka lebaka la gore bong ba bone ke ba borre. And to loosely translate that is that it is the respect and the dignity that is given to men simply on the basis of their gender or how they perform their gender. So they get paid more for miracle.
Maemo ne a re motho na le maemo raro o mo status.
Yes.
You know, and that's exactly it. Men bana le status se ba iphileng so.
Le rona se re ba fang sona. Nke lo buza siswami. How would you translate that male privilege kaSizulu?
Ukuhlonipha umuntu kakhulu ngezizathu sokuthi ene uyimuntu wesilisa. That's what I would say. Because ukuhlonipha encompasses respect and dignity. And when you say kakhulu, it means that you're doing a lot.
I want us to take a look at the customary laws that govern people who are traditionally married, whether in monogamous or polygamous relationships. They are protected by the law, but do they have equal claim to property according to custom?
I want to tell you about a story about a woman who was threatened to be murdered based on the premise that she had fought for her right, her marital right to have land of her deceased husband.
Is this happening in 2020?
Feminists that are living in rural communities, that bill that has not been signed, the traditional courts bill, is going to give too much power to the chiefs to become their own courts, right? Which means that they won't have access to this mulao ona wa magoa wa Roman duchy uru tsaileng.
Hey, marako mind mulao. Wait, sometimes when it's convenient. No. Obviously, for women, it works that the Constitution enshrines our rights, and it doesn't work for us that our own families are trying to kill us because we're trying to claim land to something that actually rightfully belongs to us.
But you know, we're here to make this language accessible to our parents, to our brothers and sisters.
It's just interesting because there are so many complexities. Like it's so layered. And I wish the discussion can continue even in the homes. So we're going to take an ad break right now. And when we come back, we continue with the discussion.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. We are still forward, fearless, and feminist.
Which means papa.
Of course.
And feminist.
Of course.
You know, when you get your first period, it kind of saddens me because what's supposed to be something that's quite beautiful and life-changing becomes the first source of shame that we as Black girls are directed towards.
How would you imagine celebrating your period? How would you make a ritual out of that, Thando?
I've seen people who've thrown red parties, surprise red parties with only women in the room, and then everyone dresses in red and they kind of bless the girl to kind of take away the shame and make it like a rite of passage, but an honorable, beautiful, process.
I would say the same way that the boys happen. You know, first of all, there's something beautiful about isolation. So when you take these girls who are about the same age, they become peers, and you isolate them, and you talk to them about what it means to be a girl or a woman in 2020.
But to be quite honest, like, Humensa is not all that great, and it's not all that happening. Number one, it's painful.
It can be.
You know, some women are literally incapacitated.
Yes.
But
see, if you look say society na lengqondo, then you know how to protect these women and to know gore ka matsatsi a itseng ngwana ha ye ko sekolong, it's possible gore mama ha ye ko mosebetsing. Menstruation is complicated, but I think the fact that we don't celebrate it makes us feel like, oh my God, this is really something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, you know, Khomotso ha o bolela ka ngqondo, o nkgopotsa my dad, right? He was such a brilliant man. He used to know when we are on our periods. He used to like feel our pain and make it easy for us to cook soup just for the pain, you know, to put heat in the stomach so that the pain is better. But I loved how even when you've hanged your bras and your panties on the washing line, that man would remove them, fold them nicely for you and pack them away.
So you
know?
And that's very big for in our country, where one of the biggest insults that anybody can throw at a man.
But to get a male perspective on this conversation, we are joined by the author of A Man Is Not a Man, Thando Mgqolozana. Hello, Thando. Welcome.
Hello, Nico, and hello to your co-panelists and to all the viewers.
Let's dive right into it. Would you say that there's a link between how males are taught about manhood in traditional rites of passage ceremonies and violence against women?
Without any doubt, I would say yes. And, you know, to support this position, I'll use my debut novel, A Man Who Is Not a Man, in which there is a scene where I describe what is called the House of the Lamb, This is when, you know, the initiate is returning and is welcomed by, you know, fellow circumcised men and joined by ladies, by girls. But what happens at the House of the Lamb, as it is described in the book, is that the girls are distributed in that house to any man, and they have no say who they're going to end up with on the night. I know that in my time, that was something that was happening. I'm not sure if it's still happening now, but I assume that as long as there is Indlu Yesibane, it will be there. This is in reference to ulwaluko, and that's just one element. But the whole issue about it is that ulwaluko, as it is practiced today, is about preparing young men to assume their positions in the patriarchal order, which is about dominating women. That is the essence of it. And some of the things that, you know, young men are taught there is, you know, I remember this being said to me, and I was so shocked that that means there is no woman who is bigger than you, including your mother. And I was like, what is that?
What's interesting, Thando, is that on the first day, well, on the day of circumcision, that when you get snipped, you're supposed to say, Ndindoda, in the same way that Nelson Mandela tells us about his most embarrassing experience, is that actually he cried out when it was his turn for that to happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, also in the movie that I wrote, in Neba, this is one of the opening scenes where you have to declare yourself to be a man. I described the same thing in A Man Who Is Not a Man, and the young man is unbelieving that just like that, Ndindoda, what does that even mean?
You are talking about really hugely secretive issues. Why? One, why so much secrecy? And two, why are you being so brazen and brave by saying, no, we're going to have a conversation about this, and I'm going to reveal some of the stuff? And I'm sure you're not even telling us a quarter or half of the things that happen in the mountain. Why did you make those choices?
I mean, I realized, Komoto, that some of the ways in which this particular ritual, you know, is being carried out today are not even, you know, the values for which it existed in the first place. So there was no such a thing, you know, there was no such a thing in which women are not supposed to be involved, they're not supposed to know, because women had a role in the process of circumcision. So it's a new thing in the way that the culture has adapted itself, so that now we're talking about what happens in the mountain stays in the mountain. It was never a thing. So for example, a mother of an initiate has a name, has a role. The sister of an initiate has a name, has a role. So this is all contemporary twisting of the original thing. every circumcision season, there is reports of young men who go to the mountain, with the idea of becoming men, and they either get mutilated or they die. Right. And it always bothered me that we don't talk enough about this. When this happens, when there's this botched circumcision, the blame is put on the initiate that there's something you did not do right. You did not observe the protocols properly. So you're blamed. So you can't speak. You don't have a voice to say, this is what I was subjected to, and so on. All of those who are affected, they get muted and they disappear afterwards. So I thought somebody has to speak for the voiceless here.
Yeah, I agree with you that somebody must speak for the voiceless. So how do we change these problematic and harmful cultural practices without necessarily losing the essence of who we are as a Black people?
What I've chosen to do is, as a person who observes those traditions, I have to speak, because people from within the culture are the ones who are supposed to stand up and speak and start this conversation, so that we can start looking at ourselves and say, do we want to be killing and mutilating our children like this? What are we achieving by that? And what is it that we can change?
Siyabonga kakhulu bhuti Thando. That was so insightful, and quite frankly, the conversation is very disruptive and necessarily so. Patriarchy is so violent. These rituals into manhood are violent, and they are sad, quite frankly.
Mara dinto ebotlhoko wena Thando ke gore batho ba bangata ba banka di principles tsa culture le patriarchy as if it's a birthright. Gore ha re ka tlosa dideng gore lefatshe le tlo fela, and it means culture ya rona e tlo fela kaofela, which I don't necessarily believe in. But anyway, there you have it. Violence against women plays out in so many different ways. What we teach our children and the generation that follows influences how women in our society are treated. Later, we'll discuss whether the Constitution protects women and queer people against discriminatory cultural practices and how the erasure of women happens through marriage and wedding ceremonies. Don't go away.
My favorite topic. Welcome to It's a Feminist Thing, Dr. Nokuzola.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome, ma. So let's start here before we go anywhere. Are you a feminist?
I would say I'm a womanist.
Oh, okay. And what would be a difference between a womanist and a feminist?
As a womanist now, I'm saying I must deal with my own issues and not be dictated by anybody from another culture or from another spirituality or from another race for that matter.
Sawona mama, bengisacela ukubuza ukuthi ilobolo beyenziwa njani kudala, before colonization and before whitewashing of culture yethu?
Okokuqala ufuneka understand what is ilobola. Ilobola is a process, it's not an event. And ilobola asiyo lento yenu namhlanje nicinga ba imali umyeni wakho uzokunika imali. No. What happens when the two people get together and decide to marry? It stops being an affair of two people. It becomes an affair of two families. Because we are building a relationship now between these two families. That is why in Nguni, for instance, we say the parents of these two, they call each other abakosi. So sinabakosi ngoku. So we are related by marriage. So now there are processes to build that relationship. One of them is ilobola.
In terms of abantu who are queer couples, let's say mhlambe you've got abantu besifazana abayi-2 abafuna ukushadana. What then are some of the challenges that might appear in those types of processes?
I want to be honest, because marriage in the first place, from an African context, is for procreation. It's not necessarily for love. Kufuneka kube khona some children. So ngoku xa ke ngoku ingamantombazana amabini, where are we going to have the grandchildren who are biological in this family? one. Number two, sizohlaba kanjani kubani ozaba inhlabi ngoku, because i-society yethu ayivumeli into yoba it could be a woman ezawuphatha umkhonto iyoma ebuhlanti, ithi ebuhlanti emazizi silapha namhlanje sizohlabela utatomkhulu, simnika le nkabe enkomo utatomkhulu, so sicela niyamkele le nkomo, and then abephethe umkhonto kufuneka hlabe. Kukhona ke zo challenges because awuzukwazi ukuhlaba being a woman.
What about the rise of a female who wants to marry another female?
In the African culture, we are not talking about individuals. We are talking about us. So there are norms, there are rules that are set that we must also agree so that we become a united a family. So now, uba ke ngoku sizawuthetha nge-individual rights that may hamper the future of this family, then there will be problems.
I think we must just remember that everybody has a right. Even if your opinion differs from my opinion on things, we must remember that the foundation for all of us is the rights that are enshrined in the constitution of the country. So whether we agree on certain things, we must not be exclusive and not inclusive, right? So people must still feel that even if I enjoy different things from what Thando enjoys, I still belong.
Mama, isiko liyashintsha. Indlela besenza ngazo izinto kudala ngeke ifane njengendlela esenza ngayo khona manje. I mean, same-sex people are here, right? And arguably they've been around even before colonial times. So my question then becomes, when njani umuntu who's in a same-sex relationship akafuna ukushada, from your perspective as a womanist, how would one navigate marrying as a same-sex couple within customary rights? Because the fact is that we are here, and the culture yetu must serve us as abantu.
You know, when we talk about isiko in the African context, or from my experience, we are talking about that activity where there's always a communication between individuals and the spiritual world and the ancestors. So those do not change. What changes are the tools that we are using. What changes is the environment.
Mama, yes, I think you bring an interesting perspective, but I would like to challenge you a little bit. When indoda passes away in a family, we are very quick to say that the woman, the survivor of that deceased husband, ought to marry the brother of the deceased in order for her to keep her estate. And yet, when it comes to same-sex relationships and where the lineage is going to come from, we never consider the possibility of the brother, or of a sibling being a potential donor of either a sperm or an egg. So I just want to challenge you there to say that it's not true that the lineage of the family will be broken in a same-sex relationship or a marriage. You can still continue the lineage, the true lineage of the family, even in a same-sex relationship. As we wrap up the conversation, I wanted to ask, what does the future then look like, going forward? Because we want to have actual solutions. So what does an inclusive future actually look like?
Hey, that is going to take time, Danam.
Okay, ma'am.
I want to be honest.
Yeah.
Because this is confusing. Perhaps we need some education from you, but can this educator don't come godlami because nothing is resist. Because we still want to cling to our cultures.
Unfortunately, time is never enough to have these kind of discussions, Ma. But I agree, education and more conversations needs to happen.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope you invite me again.
Thank you so much for your time.
This conversation was, it's a very contentious conversation.
Very.
But I think we need to be, resolute on a few things. The first thing is that the Bill of Rights was created out of the recognition of the fact that individual needs are important and that we cannot kind of deviate or subvert or oppress individual human rights and needs for the sake of the community.
Yeah.
So the understanding that Doctor was unpacking now, I think for me is quite archaic. And it's not to say that group rights or communal rights are not important. But what I'm saying is that we have a constitution that is the supreme law of the land. And this constitution recognizes that we really do need to make paramount human rights and individual rights.
Sure.
Because when you only focus on communal rights, it leaves a huge gap for the violation of individual rights, which is what has been happening in our society historically.
And interestingly, Ntsako, our roving reporter, had this kind of a conversation with people out on the streets, right? So let's go and hear what they were saying.
Definitely.
What does lobola mean for you, and what did it mean for you in the process of getting married?
It's one of the beautiful things that they've been tainted, obviously, by perception and what others feel and whatnot. But I don't think it's something that we need to do away with.
It's a beautiful process.
I really think it is, because, you know, bearing in mind, obviously, these things also have ancestral implications. So you don't want to be married and think, oh, we're sorted, and yet your ancestors know nothing of this union.
Ama African customs, do you think today pushing patriarchy?
Our process almost got very complicated because then my paternal side of the family felt like they had to get the money. So the process of lobola had to be done on their side. But then there was some form of disconnection when I was growing up from my paternal side. So I ended up living with my mother's family. And that's where the letter went, and that's where the negotiations happened. But that just complicated the process. So in terms of looking at how lobola was done, in terms of our traditions being done on the father side of the family, then it's patriarchal just in that sense for us. That's how I experienced it.
She was not allowed to be involved in the process. I feel it is more patriarchal in that sense.
I'm starting to feel like lobola is the buying of women. Do you think lobola is accommodative of the LGBT community, and what was that process like for you?
We were like, okay, guys, you don't know what to do? Make a plan. And then 2 years later, they were able to. So it's about rewriting within the parameters. Culture is not static, right? It's constantly changing, and it should change as nathi change and njengabantu. So if kunamantombazana who atafuna ukushada and we can see okay, lobola mhlambe izocancela out or whatever, the fact of the matter is these two families need to meet. So I think for the first time, even my family, they're more open-minded now. So the next person who wants to marry and they're marrying someone of the same sex, but it needed to start somewhere.
How do we evolve this to not also make you feel like you're buying her and you feel like you're being sold?
Yeah. So let's also look at the circumstance and what can he afford? What are the circumstances affording us to do? Like, just redefine what the process means for us. I think that's a way to move forward, because it won't be the same for me. It won't be the same for the next person.
We need to let go of this image that a woman is helpless and she needs someone to come in and save her, someone who's going to make sure that she's financially secure, when you can also do that yourself. I think that's why also these marriages also end early, because already you owe this person, you owe that person, and whatnot. And there's an expectation
How do we now remove the patriarchy from lobola?
Yes, borakgadi are very important. And our process was fully done by Utabao.
I even have family where something like that is happening, that he's more of the, you know, I'll take care of the kids, I'll clean, I'll cook, I'll do everything. because I'm unemployed, and I have all this time. Why should you come back from work and still do all of this work? I mean, we need to live in an equal society now.
Moment like that. Yeah.
Sure. You know, for me, one of the things that stick out of that insert watching is that marriage is so much more in African tradition when we talk about ancestral ties. So that's why it's important. You're not just combining two individuals, you're combining two legacies, I suppose, of people.
For me, this whole struggle and issue about money is actually probably tied in colonialism and, you know, capitalist intention. And so for me, I just find it so problematic that we, even in 2020, refuse to let go of colonial thinking, even in the most intimate spaces of our lives.
Marriages are about land, are about inheritance, are about forming alliances between people who need to fight a common cause. So love it's a nice to have, but historically speaking, whether you're speaking about colonialism or pre-colonialism, as the good doctor would have said, there's usually a good reason for marriage to take place, and love is typically not it.
Clearly, I'm a feminist. Those two lesbians were doing the impossible. Because according to our doctor, what they did is just not something that's supposed to happen or even can happen. So yeah, it's that queer magic, I suppose. You know, as you can see, it's vitally important that we know our rights, but also that we make an assessment of some of the customs and practices enforced on us so that we can make our own decision on how customs can exist in our contemporary society without erasing entire groups. Remember to share your thoughts on our social media pages.
Colonization played a huge role in changing some of our customs. Women had a say in tribal gatherings, and they even had a voice in their community. And we've touched on the impact of these practices. We've touched on how they have impacted on women's lives. But what impact have they had on men and queer people? Here to discuss this is Professor Kopano Ratele. It's time for Allies Corner. Professor Ratele, thank you for joining us again. You know, there's a term African hegemonic masculinity. What exactly is that? And go like the examples in
in simple terms, it's the dominant way of being an African man or boy or masculine subject. When we say it is hegemonic, we simply mean that it is supported by the majority of people without it being violent. So, for instance, if you live in a place where it says men should not take care of children, for instance, nobody forces you to do that. But you start believing that it is not men's job to take care of children.
Prof, what did colonization do to our African perception of our sexual and gender identities?
Colonization really messed up men across Africa, but everywhere where the colonizer arrived. So let me put it this way: in South Africa, in particular, from the 17th century. So take when men were forced to leave their families then, when mining exploded basically in South Africa. And so mining becomes part of the colonial capitalist machine. It forces men to leave wherever they've been doing their productive means of life, of earning a living, and say, go to Johannesburg, go to Kimberley, go dig some diamonds, some gold. And in that moment, it just basically disrupts everything that these men had known up to that moment. But you can see how it doesn't only do something to men, because when you leave home, you're part of this family, you go live somewhere in Johannesburg in a hostel. The lack of dignity in Cape Town, in Johannesburg is immense. But it also disrupts the family structure. And that moment is something we're still having to pay for. And the colonizer even if the colonizer sometimes has left.
I just want us to talk a little bit more about how colonization has impacted queer lives, in our society today. There is a presumption that, queerness is un-African. I mean, is that even true?
It's impossible that you can have a society where you don't have desires as a male-bodied person for other men, as a trans person, or as a bisexual or a queer woman. What colonization did with all over Africa, by the way, is introduced what I call penal codes. Colonization itself was homophobic. So it introduces a particular ways of thinking about people of different desires, a particular practice that I always give an example for. This is an amazing practice where women, older women and younger women would sleep in the same bed. And in that moment, if you think of queer as not just a sexual identity, but as an identity about intimacy, about a life together of women who were washing each other, it is the most incredible thing. That one practice and other practices were disrupted, were called unnatural colonization.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Kopana-Ratele, for your insights. It's quite interesting to me, Thando, that even how we archive our practices and our cultures. We've erased queer history. We've erased queer existence. And, perhaps not having the language for it is something that we never needed. But we have not codified its existence.
Look, the reality is that our existence has been disrupted. And it's funny and ironic to me that people feel a certain way when we say that we want to disrupt and dismantle patriarchy, when we were being disrupted and being dismantled before colonization, during colonization.
Patriarchy is imperialism. That's one thing that we should put out there for men. It's something that was a tool of oppression, of colonization, and it's imperial. Next up, we explore the ways in which we can move our society forward by making the necessary changes to cultural practices without losing our essence. Keep engaging with us on our social media platforms, and we look forward to reading your comments.
Welcome back. We're still speaking culture and customs. My fellow feminists, can culture and custom truly evolve? Just looking back at what we had discussed earlier, the truth is that custom is a long-standing practice, and its legitimacy is based on the premise that it has been practiced for a long period of time without any interruption and disruption. And even from a legal perspective, that's how we recognize, different types of cultural and customary practices. So can we truly say that culture and custom can evolve in our society?
Look, you have all these beautiful rights and entitlements. But like you said earlier, we are not able to access all of them. But let me tell you what I think about culture and practices. For as long as they are harmful and they deny people access to their rights, I say those must be dismantled. We must do to those what Covivi did to the whole world. It came and disrupted the norma, changed the status quo, right? So that's what I think.
But I think, Thando, just to jump onto your point about it being a long-standing practice, weddings and funerals are long-standing practices, but how we do them has definitely changed over time. If you think about how we bury our dead, how the white wedding dress, the coffin, these are not things that were part of our customs or culture, a couple of years back. So I think what we must be careful about is when culture changes, and I think as women we can change culture. We can definitely change culture, but we must be careful of the agenda in which our culture changes.
And it can go backwards, quite frankly. Let's not take advantage of the hard-won rights. We've seen countries where abortion rights have been reversed, where there's been an attempt to do so. So we can't just sit on our laurels.
The gag rule.
The gag rule has not been helpful. I would say, did you know, by the way, that Queen Victoria was the first woman to wear white at a wedding?
Wow.
Did you know that Queen Victoria was the first woman to wear black at a funeral? Just because of how she felt. And now you call it your culture.
Wow.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know. Honestly, I didn't know.
It's on that sale. So I think culture, of course, changes. It has to. Even the white dress will evolve eventually. You know, isn't it unbelievable? Like that one woman. I mean, I love the fact that she's a woman. I resent what she's done to the world, but I love the fact that she's a woman. So yeah, culture will change when necessary.
Yeah. You know,
it has to.
I think society is not going to change unless we enter into all the different pockets and facets of it in order to cause the disruption that we're talking about. So for me, I feel like we need to change the curriculum in our basic education, in our schools. We need to be teaching, in fact, all of our children, not just girl children, but we need to be teaching them about their bodies, about different sexual gender and sexual orientations and different identities. We need to be teaching them about concepts like autonomy and freedom, choice, and enthusiastic
and saying
consent.
Yes.
Yes.
We are taught how to say no to sex, but nobody says, my child, you have a right to enjoy sex. Your first sexual experience should be something beautiful. You should want to do it. No, he shouldn't do this. He should do that, so that we know what to expect.
Thando, I fully agree with what you are saying, and that is why the work that Soul City does is advocating for that change in the curriculum. I remember how when CSE was introduced, there was so much pushback, and we were trying to just say to young people, to children, understand your body, understand why it's important to go through menstruation, why as a young boy at the age of 12, 13, you'll start having wet dreams, right? All those beautiful things that they must experience without shame, but how they are put to shame just for experiencing what comes naturally.
Just on the point of, you know, culture, I think that we also need to speak about feminist culture and feminist practice, right? Because there are some toxic things that happen.
Oh, yes,
that we can say are feminist culture. And there are some toxic things that we can speak about that, you know, are feminist practice. And I think that, you know, as we have this conversation, we must also bear in mind, you know, you can't sit with us. You know, using language to exclude. You know, you know, like, yeah, you know, just always to remember, as we build a feminist culture, it's about equality, and that it's about inclusion, and it's about holding each other.
Completely.
And also being a real African, being a true African is about accepting all of your Africanness. And that means accepting the parts of you that are queer, that are women, that are living with disability, all the parts of you, because you are me and I am you. And that's what makes us truly African.
Yes, ma'am. On that note, to accept all things unconsciously, just because that's how it's always been done, is to allow unacceptable practices to dominate our society and to perpetuate discrimination and abuse of women and transgender communities. As we continue to evolve in this fast-moving era of the fourth industrial revolution, it becomes crucial that we not lose our cultures and customs, but consciously transform them to be inclusive and compassionate. As we consciously choose to become a more compassionate society with the goals of achieving peace and prosperity for all, it becomes incumbent on all of us to individually take a look at how we are perpetuating discrimination, enabling patriarchy, and the abuse of vulnerable members of our communities. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our incredible team and guests. Next week, this is what we'll be talking about.
I am a child of God. I'm also Black and gay. Today we're discussing the big daddy of religion's problems, patriarchy in religion. God says I am his child. We have this understanding, we're like this, we're tight. In rejecting the feminine in themselves, men then act violently against the feminine in other people, starting from queer people and then moving all the way through to women.
In lots of our religious institutions, which is still very male and masculine, women are excluded.
The church must understand that it's not listening to basic empathy.
People's sexual orientations should not exclude them from an institution which should be all-inclusive.
And the church was supposed to be leading society in terms of inclusivity and love, embracing outcasts, the marginalized, people considered sinners.
We need to see all people in the image of God.
Next week's episode, we delve into the world of religion and patriarchy, asking the question, how does religion affect feminism? Until next week, from our team, we say good night and goodbye.